Hello, I'm Henrietta Huff, Chair of the Centennial Team here at Belin Memorial. And today I'd like to talk with you for just a minute about our history, beginning with our benefactor, who is Reverend James Lynch Blaine, and for whom we are named. We have on our property, which is a wonderful thing, his headstone and a copy of his obituary, which was from the newspaper and was saved by one of our former members over many, many years. When you realize how long ago he passed away, you'll recognize how precious it is that we have these things. But right here in our cemetery, we have his grave site and those of some others that were affiliated with him at that time. And they tell some things about him, which is a wonderful thing. They tell the kind of man that he was. As a minister of Christ, he was gentle to all men, apt to teach and patient in all things, showing himself a pattern of good works. How wonderful that these are the things that we know about him. He loved all men, regardless of their color or what their native habitat was. His family settled in Charlestown and were rice planters because that was the primary crop at that time. As they prospered, they moved on up to the Waccamaw River, and they first purchased Oatland Plantation, which is down in the Pawleys Island area, and then later on Wachesaw Plantation, which is right here in Murrells Inlet. He was accepted in connection in 1811. That means that he was accepted as a preacher by the conference. And then he was ordained later. We don't know where he went to school, but in 1813, which was 2 years later, he was ordained a deacon by Bishop Francis Asbury, who you also may have heard of, because he was one of the early people of Methodism who was associated with the Wesley brothers. In 1815, he was ordained an elder by Francis McKendrick, and we are so happy that he became a full pastor. His health was not really very good, but he went about doing things that were good for the people and that were needed so much by many of the people who were poor, who were in very primitive conditions, and for whom he could do much, not only in loving them, but in helping them to have a better life. Because most of the people did not read, they memorized Bible verses and hymns that he taught them, and many of those they learned to sing to the African tunes that they had known in the land of their birth. He went about doing good with all his might, caring for, preaching, and teaching the people that he loved. Indians, blacks, whites, all men were his friends. These are pictures of the mission house which Reverend Blaine commissioned to be built in 1850. He had actually started the mission in 1830 with 3 other pastors that were traveling pastors or circuit riders also. Reverend Theophilus Huggins, Reverend William Carson, and Reverend John Minnie. But the construction of the mission house was to be on 2.7 acres in almost exactly the same place that our sanctuary sits today. The mission house was to be constructed of fine yellow pine in the most workmanlike manner. And he saw to it that the men who came to build the house were even housed in a neighbor's shed so that they did not have to stay out of doors, because again, you remember that we did not have a lot of buildings here at that point in time. So this was a wonderful new piece to their property that they were able to build. And the interesting part of that, I guess, is considering that this was built in 1850 and has been moved not once, not twice, but 3 times, and it now sits just north of Perry's Bait and Tackle Shop on the creek and is a private residence. But it was moved twice on the property. Once to the middle of the lot near a cedar tree that still stands there. And then it became the pastor's office and a place where they held Sunday school classes and so forth. Cedar Hill, as it was in 1964, was just like an ordinary little creek house. And the one thing that we know about it was that it had a special place where not only did they store their clothing or linen sometimes, but they also hid slaves who were maybe in trouble with their masters, had had some problem at home, and he would hide them there or allow them to hide there until he was able to mediate the situation. In addition to the house, there was a kitchen. And you may be interested in why the kitchen was built separately. You know, all of the cooking was done with wood, a live fire. And so often houses were burned down because something occurred, somebody didn't stand and watch the fire in the stove. They also had 2 sheds, a stable, and a smokehouse. And this is a picture of the condition that the house was in, called the Mission House again, before it was moved. And it looks like a deserted cabin, doesn't it? The most important thing that occurred, perhaps as far as we're concerned, is that on December the 11th, 1850, that same year that the house was built, Reverend Belin signed a letter of agreement with the trustees of the Methodist Episcopal Church, which is what we were called at that point in time, that he would give that 2.7 acres on which it was built to the Methodist Church, and that it would be always kept for that, and that the proceeds from his estate, which he later wrote into his last will and testament, would go for mission work on the Waccamaw Neck and to educate people who needed to have help in getting their education. This letter of agreement has provided many things for us as well as others. And the last piece of that land was really just sold the last couple of years. The property consisted of the hospital, the post office, the Japanese restaurant that many of you like to attend for birthdays and things of that nature. And again, all the way from the Atlantic Ocean back to the Waccamaw River was the extent of his property, which he inherited at 24. Imagine that you should inherit something like that at age 24. He was not at all interested in the wealthy planter's life and was interested in the circuit riders. So he really didn't benefit a lot except the ability that he had to do the things that he wanted to do because of the money that his family had left for him. We move now to I think first we'll tell you about his having passed on and how we happen to have him right here. You know, they did not have mortuaries and all of the things that we have now. So when he was injured, they brought him back to the mission house and he died right there. We're told that he died on the steps. We don't know that for certain. But apparently it was a very serious injury that he had when his horse bolted and threw him out of the carriage and into an oak tree. We have many oak trees in our cemetery today, probably some of which, well, in fact, we know some of which were here when he was alive, but they were not the huge big trees that they are now. And so he was brought back to the mission house, died there, and then was buried basically right across the street, which is now the Belin Cemetery. In 1925, a group of Murrells Inlet residents had decided that they really wanted a place close to home. And they were at that time going to Bethel Church, which used to be out on 707 and McDowell Shortcut. And if you ride down there sometime, you will see that there is a cemetery still there, but the church was basically not doing well as far as numbers were concerned, and the building was in disrepair. And so they decided to close that church, and the members from there came to Blaine when we were able to get this new sanctuary. They learned of a sanctuary that was still standing down in Pawleys Island, and it was the one that had been at Oatland Plantation. And Mrs. Mac Oliver, or Teeny as she was known, banded together with some of her friends and decided that they would like to have that church be here, and she would have it close to her house, which was Oliver's Lodge, so that she could look after it. So they petitioned the conference, and they contacted the last remaining members of that church, which were the last Latchcotts, and it was disassembled, moved by ox cart and wagon to Murrells Inlet, board by board. There was not one nail found in it. It was all put together with wooden pegs. And interestingly, the bees, the honeybees, had found their way into the pillars. It was almost exactly the same in appearance as the church that we have now, except, of course, much, much smaller. And if you can envision these pillars that we have on our church filled with bees and how much honey that would make, you would understand very easily why they left those pillars there. They did not have any heat. They did not have air conditioning, certainly. They had what they called trash burners, one in the front and one in the back, with which they heated it in the winter. And in the summer, I guess they just opened the doors and the windows and let the breezes blow through. But they sometimes held their Sunday school classes out on logs that were in the yard, or they would go down and sit at the edge of the inlet. One of the things that is so important for us to remember is that you and I are the church. Our membership has grown tremendously over these many years, almost 100 years. And the mission work that we are able to do because of our apportionments and benevolences has also grown. And you and I are the church. We provide all that we have in the church. We provide the manpower as well as the financial resources for us to do the things that we do. As the numbers grew, there was a need for the church to get bigger because they just did not have enough pews anymore. So they did a renovation and they doubled the size of the church. They even added a bustle. Now, many of you won't know what a bustle is, but it's kind of like just a piece that's tacked on. And that allowed the choir to have a place to put their robes on, and possibly even the preachers, so that they could come and have the robes on for the services. The administration building was built in 1967, which allowed space for offices, as well as Sunday school classrooms, a fellowship hall where they could have dinners and so forth. And BCLC was also begun and is still housed in that same building, and we are so grateful for all the care that maybe even some of you have received at BCLC. One of the activities that began after that administration building was built was the barbecue and bazaar. The first one took place in 1967, and we've been cooking barbecue ever since and doing good things with the money that has been earned from that to take care of missions in our area and away. The first one raised $942, and I'm not sure what we raised last year, but I know that we're going to be getting ready to do another one in the fall, and we'll look forward to raising much, much more than the $942. These are scenes from the construction time of the new sanctuary, or the present sanctuary, from 1992. The steeple going in place, that's one of the primary things that people see about a church. And you know, some of the churches are called high steeple churches, but it doesn't matter what size your steeple, it's what's going on inside that's important. I want to tell you a story about something that happened atop that steeple. We used to have an iron cross that was atop it and now stands in the garden right across from the Family Life Center, because during the service, the preacher and one of the choir members was to sing a duet, and the lightning came and struck not once, but twice. And with that, the preacher said, "I don't know about you, but I'm out of here." And with that, the cross came down. So rather than have lightning striking the church, which none of us want, it can strike in the garden, but to our knowledge has not. So we're grateful to have it so that we can just pass by it in the garden. This photograph says, "Make straight the way for Wednesday, April 20th, 1994, for the old sanctuary of Belin Memorial to be moved to be the new home for Joseph B. Bethay United Methodist Church, a newly formed congregation that was named for our first black bishop in South Carolina, Joseph B. Bethay. While we were certainly sad to see it go, we're so happy that they have grown and prospered in their home. And we're so proud that they have been able to keep this place that was so special to us alive and being used. All of these pictures are available for you to come and see in the hallway of the Family Life Center, which was constructed in 2000. And we would be so happy for you to look on the other hallway across from this one, and you can see the rubbing from the gravestone of Reverend Belin and read all the wonderful things that it has to say on it. In 2017, it was felt that we needed to do something to beautify our waterfront and to change the cross that had been out there for a number of years. So new gardens, a new plaza area was constructed with a brand new, wonderful, big cross that has become a focal point not only for our campus, but for many who come to visit Murrells Inlet. Probably one of the most photographed places on the East Coast, because you see not only the beautiful cross, you see the inlet and all of the wonder behind it of God's creation. We are so grateful not only for these gardens, but for the gardens that are across the street between the cemetery and the Family Life Center, and so grateful for all who work to make this place such a special place.